Welcome back to Newsroom Live, 8:33 p.m. We're just a few days into this new year, but there are some new laws that have gone into effect, and we want to make sure you're up to date with it. New year, new laws, and in order to get an expert view on these, by Zoom we have labor attorney Amy Feldman of the Judge Group. Amy, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Let's start off. I guess one of the first topics that we talked about was minimum wage. That's going up.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to benefit from this because in New York City, in Long Island, and Westchester, the minimum wage is going up by 50 cents an hour, up to $17 an hour. In the rest of the state, it's still going to be $16 an hour, which means you have the state of New Jersey beaten by a hair because their new minimum wage is $15.92 an hour, the oddly specific, especially considering there are no more pennies. But theirs has gone up to $15.92 an hour. Even Connecticut, while they are higher, they also have a weird number, which is $16.94 an hour. So in the whole area, there's a wage increase for minimum wage workers, which is really a good thing when you think about the increase in the cost of living.
That's true. I mean, that's certainly moving in the right direction, some would point out, which is badly needed, especially as we see the wealth gap that's developing in the country, in the state, and across the world. Probably the increases don't match that of those of CEOs, but it's the right direction, right? The other thing we wanted to talk to you about is the change at the DMV. Can you talk about how it's, as we understand it, it's fewer points in order for a license to be suspended in a city, in a country, in a state that very heavily favors drivers' rights? Can you talk about what this change is about?
Yeah, it's going to mean that drivers are going to need to be more cautious, which maybe that's a good thing. I suspect the people who get caught up in it are not going to think so, because it used to be that the DMV could suspend your license if you got 11 points on it in the state of New York. It's now gone down to 10 points before the DMV can suspend your license. And simultaneously, not only did they lower the points for taking away your license, but they increased the number of points on some violations. Like if you're caught talking on a cell phone when you are driving, it used to be 5 points. Now it's 6 points. You're more than halfway to a license suspension the very first time you're convicted of that. There are other types of penalties that are also going up. Reckless driving is going up substantially from 5 points on your license to 8 points on your license. And even if you're driving 10 miles over the speed limit, which is 10 miles over the speed limit, we can't make light of it, but it's not 25 miles over the speed limit, now your points are increasing from 3 to 4 points on your license for that kind of speeding offense.
Yeah, and I just want to bring up this thought, Amy. One of the things that I can't forget about 2025, unfortunately, was that mother crossing the street with her two young daughters and young son, who were mowed down by that driver who had, her vehicle had something like a minimum of 93 violations in the past 12 months, including over 20 for speeding, including for speeding in school zones. And that driver was driving with a suspended license. So in this case, am I correct to say that even though we're talking about the significant change that's happening with the DMV lowering the number of points for a license to be suspended, but in the case of that poor family that got obliterated, the mother and the two daughters being killed, this wouldn't have done anything?
Well, as you're well aware, laws are only as good as the enforcement of them. So you can have the best of intentions and still, not face in certain situations, there are people who are still going to violate the law with seemingly no penalty until the end. That said, the big hope in a law like this is that while you do have these horrible situations of people who are just scofflaws, for the vast majority of people, they're careful, right? They make mistakes, they speed, they do stupid things every once in a while, but maybe something like this is a wake-up call. So you know that your next violation, your license will be suspended. I think the vast majority of people will take it seriously, and that's really, I think, the best you can do.
All right, we'll look and see if Albany does anything more on that. The affordable healthcare laws that are now in effect, some of them seem significant. We were talking about how it affects things like EpiPens, but that's not all. Can you go over some of the changes that you think are notable with respect to our healthcare laws?
Sure. As you said, EpiPens. That's a good one, right? Just to remind the viewers, EpiPens could cost $600, which means there were a lot of families who could not afford the life-saving medication to prevent a child or any family member from going into anaphylactic shock. Luckily now, with this new law, the cost of those EpiPens is being capped at $100 a year. So that's a lucky thing, right? We're mindful that that's still real money, but it's a lot better and puts it really within reach of a lot more people, luckily. The other thing I think that people will want to know about is that there's breast cancer treatment, imaging, and prevention that are now going to have to be covered by insurance companies. So, imaging, mammograms, screenings, those costs will all be covered to get you a good head start. And in the case where somebody needs chemotherapy, insurers now have to pay for the cost of those cooling caps that can actually prevent hair loss, which is such a big part of the way that people see themselves during the treatment. That'll help tremendously psychologically for people who are going through it.
Yeah, you would think some of these things were already in place. It's strange to think it took the year 2026 to
Right.
bring about this, but okay, that's what it
Right.
is. And a
Right.
couple of the lesser ones, but we have time for it. The
Okay.
street vendors. That's been an
Yeah.
issue in New York City. No longer will face misdemeanor penalties for repeat violations for minor infractions like being set up too far from the curb or using a cardboard box to showcase merchandise. They will instead be issued civil penalties. Can you talk about
Right.
what is the subtle difference here between a
Yeah.
misdemeanor and a
Yeah, no,
civil
that's a
penalty?
good point because I think a lot of people don't know, which is that if you had these repeat violations of what you just mentioned are really very minor violations, setting up a little too far from the curb or displaying your wares in cardboard containers. I mean, these are not the types of things that make a big difference. They're really minor violations. But if you had repeated violations, you could get a criminal charge. You could have a misdemeanor on your record for something that was really such a minor violation. Again, it was only in the case of a repeated violation, but still, that's a criminal charge that'll show up on a background check. Now, these are still going to be civil violations, so you should still be taking it seriously, and there are still fines that are associated with it, but it doesn't mean that you have a criminal record anymore. It's a subtle difference, but it makes a difference. Somebody, say, for example, gives up the street vending and tries to get a job with an employer who checks a background check. A criminal violation will show up on that in a way that a civil penalty will not.
Now, what would happen in the case? I don't know if you remember the churros lady. That was, I think, pre-COVID, and she was on a subway platform. And I talked to the MTA. They were very empathetic to what she was trying to do to feed her family. But they said, and the video came out and it looked really bad, right? The police had her churros. They were taking her out of the subway. She was wailing, and people were all over the officers. But you could see it in the face of the officers. They weren't happy about having to do this. I don't think they went to police academy hoping one day to tackle a churros lady in her cart. And then when we talked to them, we found out that she had repeatedly been issued requests,
Right.
if not warnings, to not be on the subway platform. We talked to the MTA too, and the MTA says our platforms are not very big. It's not the place for vendors because then it narrows where the riders can be on the platform. And we all know one of the things that New Yorkers probably have on their minds is to not get pushed on the tracks, whether it be accidentally because it's a crowded platform or not. So there are reasons there, and they said that the laws allowed them to basically take her out of the platform. Does the civil penalties now then restrict police officers from being able to take an act like that, however visually inciting it is, but how necessary it is from a safety standpoint?
Right. So, it's always a fine line between how much rope do you give somebody, how much leeway do you give them to continue to violate what they know is the law until the time that you have to take action. There is a point at which you do need to be forceful about it. Now, that's that MTA, that can be a different situation, and there are different rules because, as you can imagine, you don't want people getting so close to the train tracks that they fall off. Although, similarly, when you're talking about street vendors in the street and how far they are from traffic, there are still reasons why you do want to have these rules in the first place. There's no question that these were set up with a rational reason. So the idea that after a while they'll still continue to get the civil penalties, I mean, that's something that, you see a video like the one that you just described, and it inflames passion. How dare you, this poor woman, right? But at a certain point, you have to say, look, this is a terrible situation, but you have to have some power to be able to remove somebody who is putting others at danger, or herself, if that's the case. This does reduce the officer's ability to make a criminal penalty. But I think that there is, when you look at the types of penalties that people are getting, dinged for over and over, you say, okay, really though, a cardboard box display, that's the type of thing we're going to give somebody a criminal record over? I think you do need to balance it, and I think that's what the lawmakers were trying to do here.
Okay, Amy, last question. Anything that didn't pass that would have gone into effect this week, or anything that you think should be taken up by way of a new law, whether it be in the city or the state?
Sure, there are a bunch of new laws that I think are being debated that probably one hopes will take effect. Things around privacy and AI as it develops. The law is very slow to follow technology because lawyers are not the most tech savvy, nor are politicians. But I think you're going to see a lot of that in 2026 when people realize just how much AI has taken over in things like the hiring process and decision making for companies like medical companies. We need to know how our data is being used and learned and reused. We need to understand what the privacy rights are going to be. I am sure you will see rights that continue to develop, even though they have not yet been passed yet. But those are the things that I think we'll want to be looking out for as the year goes by.
All right, labor attorney Amy Feldman of the Judge Group, thanks so much for judging these new laws that are in effect. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Joe, let's take a 2-minute break here. When we come back, we're going to talk to our sports producer, Lou Albanese, because I need somebody to yell at me today.